Thank you for being here on time. Thank you for your support and joining us. Welcome everybody. My name is Xenia Tsuhornloe. I'm a special envoy for the Tropical Forest Forever facility. I'm nevertheless not the expert. We have a lot of experts in the room this morning, which helps with the narrative. So the objective of the panel today really is to highlight the unique proposition that the Tropical Forest Forever facility and its financial engine, the Tropical Forest Investment Fund, represent for the international investment community, both in protecting our global rainforests, but above all in creating value. The Tropical Forest Forever facility, as most of you know, is a very new global financing mechanism which combines sovereign and philanthropic funds, capital, together with institutional investments, with the aim to create a fund of $125 billion. And this aims to create annual results-based payments to countries that will look after their rainforests, stop them from deforestation, and make sure that we have an intact ecosystem in the global rainforest. But we will hear more about the details from the experts. Most important thing to say and to add to this, 20% of all the payments going to the rainforest countries is meant to go to indigenous people and local communities, and we're hoping we will hear one of the voices from the indigenous community a bit later on. So not only is the TFFF innovative in the way it combines capital, it's also innovative in the way it allocates the capital to the tropical rainforest countries, result-based payments, and they're annual rather than grants that these governments have had to rely on in the past. So you can plan your budgets, you can plan your structures, you can plan your policies. That turns everything around. So the actual opportunity we have with this fund is really catalytic. It can change the whole way that we've been looking at ecosystems. And if this works for the tropical rainforest, it can work for many, many other ecosystems as well. So it's exciting in many, many ways. It's exciting because it's a blended finance structure that has been set up by Global South and Global North. And we've got some of the representatives of those countries who've invested and as well who will receive some of the funds to talk to us this morning. So without further ado, I'll do a quick sort of run of program of what we have. We have two wonderful keynote speakers. Frances Seymour, who is, I will get into your bio in a little bit, but shakes her hand because she's too humble, but she's a superstar when it comes to forest science. And we have Glenn Bush as well, both of them from the Woodward Climate Institute, to talk about the science and the environmental and the economic case behind it. We will also hear, as I said, from two of the leading investment countries, both Norway and Brazil, to hear their case as to why they stepped in on this. But as we know, nature is not only saved by rational and, dare I say it, investment mindset, it is also important to speak to those who have a moral and an emotional commitment to the actual forests. And that is why it's so important that we have a representative of the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as I said, hopefully Juanca will join us from the Indigenous Voices. And last but not least, Isabel, thank you very much to Barclays and the whole Barclays team for putting this together, for having us here. Isabel has been a really driving force as the head of nature finance at Barclays, so we're really pleased that we're here with you and that we will also hear your view as to what the institutional investment community is to bring in on this. So thank you very much. Without further ado, we will actually start with the representative of the Ministry of the Environment of Norway. We have the Special Envoy for Climate and Environment, Andreas Dahl Jørgensen. I hope I said that right. Andreas needs to head off. So we will give the mic to you, Andreas, and I will then pass on to the next.
Thank you so much, Senja. I was allowed to take the tie off, but Patrick is here, so as a co-chair, I decided I have to keep it on. I even put my button on here. So, if I sound coherent this morning, it's because I was up all night watching Norway crush Senegal and on Friday we're going to crush France. It's not the first time forests have been victim of more important short-term priorities. But we're going to change that. And I can assure you that for the government of Norway, TFFF is a top priority on par with beating France or a little bit higher. Everyone here knows why forests are important for the climate and for the environment and for the people living in tropical forests. What I don't think we have made enough communications around to the right decision makers is how important tropical forests are for global food security, for food prices here in the UK, for water and for conflicts and wars and refugees. This is a global security challenge, and we need to treat it as such. And TFF is part of a package of solutions that can try to resolve that. TFF is not going to be the one solution to solving deforestation. And I'm very excited about Brazil's proposal for a new roadmap to end deforestation, which outlines an eminent list of things that we should prioritize. And it talks about the important priorities forest countries do, the fiscal policies, the sector policies, land use planning, law enforcement, protected areas, indigenous peoples protection. All of those things TFFF will support. We also need to address commodity markets and the risk of deforestation in supply chains of the food staples that we eat every day. We need to change the financial system to align behind that. We need other strategies beyond TFFF to protect indigenous peoples and local communities' rights. We need global collaboration to address international forest and nature crime. But we do need, and that's been a priority for us since we started Norway's International Climate Forest Initiative like 17 years ago. We do need a global incentive structure that provides predictable incentives for tropical forests that deliver. We've seen it work. We've seen it work with REDD+. We've seen it work with our bilateral partnerships, with the Amazon Fund in Brazil. Brazil has reduced emissions about 80 years of Norway's emissions. So it's huge scale with limited resources. And those resources have supported thousands of law enforcement operations and fire operations, provides school meals for 1.7 million children in the Amazon region with locally produced sustainable food. It supported 100 protected areas, indigenous territories. Impact at a massive scale that we can't do project by project. This is what we need to support countries to do. So TFFF can scale up, replicate, and sustain such efforts across the tropical forests. And that's why we're fully behind this. There's been some strange press stories that spread rumors almost, or misunderstandings of Norway's commitment. We have a parliamentary mandate to move forward with our contribution to Tropical Forest Forever facility once our shared conditions are met. So it will be a tough year to meet those conditions. Fundraising will be a key part of that. We do need a broader group of sponsor countries to come behind TFFF. Norway was part of a smaller group of countries that had the chance to look into more of the details before Belém. But this year, we need to broaden that group of countries and talk about why this is important to them and the opportunity this provides. We have to refine the financial model so it ensures that we can provide predictable flows to tropical forest countries and maintain this forever aspect that the model holds for the long term. But this is work that we're already working intensively on the governance, on the facility that will be in the World Bank, the details around the environmental rules, the funding provisions for indigenous peoples and local communities, the fiduciary requirements to channel the funds. All those things are in motion, and this is the time to broaden the conversation and to bring in more countries. Yes, there are risks with TFFF. We're definitely aware that there is a risk by investing in it, but there's a much bigger risk in not doing it, and that matters not only to the tropical forest countries, but to all of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. Right, we now go into the depth of things. Francis, I know you don't want me to talk about who you are, but I do think a little bit So Frances is first and foremost, at the moment, she's the senior policy advisor at the Woodwell Climate Institute, but you also worked in the Biden administration and served as a senior advisor for forests in the US Department of State Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. You've held previously distinct senior fellowships at the World Resource Institute. She's been an architect for REDD Plus transaction. We just heard about how important they also are. And you worked with the Oslo Tropical Forest Forum. Basically, in one word, you are a forest superstar. You've also written a book called Why Forests, Why Now? And I think that's the perfect introduction to your keynote. Thank you, Frances.
Thank you, Zinnia, for that all too generous and too long introduction. So my job, let's see if I can find the right thing here, is to talk about financing tropical conservation as a no-regrets investment. And as Andreas has already said, everybody in this room already believes in that, so I think this should be a very light lift, and I'll just elaborate on what Andreas has already flagged. I guess the first thing I'll do is just quickly flag the key messages here. Oh, sorry. First, I'm going to talk about Woodwell. Brief introduction. So Woodwell is a science-focused organization. Have a whole bunch of real scientists who are out there measuring carbon fluxes and stuff. I'm not one of them. But I help work on the policy implications and communications of their results. Woodwell works at this nexus of climate, people, and nature. And even though it's a relatively small organization, through partnerships works to have impact across scales. Importantly for today's event, in Woodwell's new strategies, one of the 9 key goals is joining the effort to halt and reverse deforestation by 2030, which is, of course, a globally agreed objective. Flagging, key messages, halting and reversing deforestation is a no-regrets investment to slow global climate change in terms of greenhouse warming. Failing to do so not only does that, but completely compounds those climate risks to things like food security and global financial systems, as Andreas has just flagged. But I'm going to end on some good news that mobilizing the needed finance is actually within reach. So we've been talking about this for 20 years. When I first got to C4 is when we read, the issues of REDD Plus were first coming on the agenda. So we know that ending tropical deforestation is one of the key mitigation options for slowing and reversing climate change. That has only gotten more important as we approach overshoot of the 1.5 degree target, and we really need to have all hands on deck to get to net zero in the land sector so as to avoid some of these catastrophic tipping points. Middle image is of that, the good news. These are some of the most cost-effective mitigation options that we have, top 5, IPCC. Bad news is that we are nowhere near being on track to achieve these goals. Familiar diagram from our colleagues at Global Forest Watch and University of Maryland on the rate of primary tropical forest loss, which, although we had some good news in 2025 after the catastrophic events of 2024, that overall trend is still kind of upwards. So we really need to double down and mobilize all the instruments that we have to reverse this trend, and certainly TFFF is one of them. Now, a lot of the science that drew me to Woodwell is about these non-carbon climate impacts of forest loss. And I'd say we've only been talking about this for about 5 years. The science has been accumulating, but it's really just gotten into the discourse more recently. The diagram to your left is about all these ways that forests interact with the atmosphere other than through the global carbon cycle, and I'm not going to detail them, but basically forests act as this natural air conditioning system of pulling heat and moisture up out of the soil and evaporating rainfall so as to release heat and moisture into the air. The surface roughness of the canopy disrupts wind patterns with turbulence and lifts it up and away, and the moisture falls as rainfall up to hundreds of kilometers away. So local temperature effects, continental scale rainfall effects. All kinds of interesting interactions with atmospheric chemistry and albedo effect with cloud cover, but anyway, you get the picture. This is one of many possible diagrams to illustrate those impacts. Some actual measurements taken comparing the western Amazon and the eastern Amazon with how much deforestation had taken place and the impacts on precipitation and temperature, but also, interestingly, overall carbon fluxes and fires. So you can see that there's both the direct and indirect impacts on local and global climate from forest loss. Now, that has profound implications, and the literature on this is burgeoning and very good. And I'm just going to do some quick hand-waving from this collage of headlines and studies. Temperature effects, already detectable in terms of repressing the productivity of soy in the Amazon and the Cerrado. Temperature effects on human health. You know, you think it's hot here in London this week? Imagine if you were headed out to work in an oil palm plantation, where the hottest part of the hottest days can be 3, 4, 5 degrees, 6 degrees centigrade, hotter than they would otherwise be because of the loss of nearby forests. I mean, really astonishing. Impacts on rainfall, again, already detectable in terms of compression of the rainy season in Brazil. Important impacts on agricultural productivity and exposure to droughts. Really interesting study here down in your lower right about the impacts on hydropower generation. 2 largest dams in Brazil, this is by CPI. The lack of disruptions to rainfall, disrupting power generation, estimated cost and revenue is about $200 million a year, just for 2 of the largest hydroelectric power dams. So these are very material and costly risks. The interesting thing I would point out about this, all of these studies, I haven't mentioned the other health impacts, I just threw them in there. Impacts of forest fires on human health, estimated 100,000 premature deaths from the Indonesian forest fires in 2015. And if you ever talk to the public health people who work on pandemics, their #1 recommendation for stopping zoonotic spillover, stop deforestation. So all kinds of impacts. The 2 themes that I would highlight from these studies are, one, mostly these are not like projected models, you know? These are actual empirical studies that have measured these impacts that are already happening. So this is real now. Second theme of all these studies is they all say that these costs are much higher than the costs of preventing them by protecting forests. So again, a no regrets investment. So now I want to get to some of the heart of the issues that Andreas highlighted, that these gradual and sometimes abrupt impacts, the sort of compounding effects of the global greenhouse warming from greenhouse gas emissions and the local climate effects from the biophysical pathways that forests affect the climate, are propagating through global trade patterns and commodity supply chains, but also through financial systems. And I'd say we've only been talking about this for maybe 2 years, where new science is emerging, modeling's being done, people trying to do the first empirical studies to actually start detecting how, for example, what could happen if Brazil loses its ability to do double cropping. An agribusiness model that is capital intensive, that fails. Imagine the impacts through insurers, creditors, exports, prices, inflation, you name it. Similarly, the chart on your bottom left, a very recent study, interesting, by Carbon Analytics with Trays, about the impacts on prices of cocoa being exported from West Africa to Europe. And the green part of the bars there is the amount attributable to the disruption of rainfall from deforestation. So again, propagating through global trade. World Bank, great study on the economics of this for impacts on GDP. Richard Demania's study about the impacts of the loss of forest-induced soil moisture on agricultural GDP across the tropics. But these are also just sort of general macroeconomic effects. A whole bunch of studies coming out, showing how forest loss is macro-critical, right, in terms of affecting not only growth trajectories, but the risk of sovereign debt, credit, and talking about a sort of a vicious cycle wherein countries that are suffering debt burdens suffer a nature-related shock, have to constrain their fiscal space to repay their sovereign debt. In doing so, sometimes liquidate natural resources to service that debt and have no fiscal space to invest in resilience. So we need to crack that vicious cycle and create a set of incentives to mobilize public and private investment into forest resilience instead of fleeing from these newly at-risk assets. So, trying to keep to my time. I'm going to close with the good news that actually the finance that we need to mobilize to avoid all these costs is actually quite feasible to raise. This puzzle piece diagram comes from a forest finance roadmap that was composed by the Forest Climate Leaders Partnership last year as an input to the COP30 presidency blank, and it's on the FCLP website, so you don't even have to take a picture. You can download the whole slide deck. But basically, the objective of the exercise was to look at an estimated forest finance gap that UNEP came up with. And for tropical forest protection and restoration, it was a gap of about $50 billion a year, by 2030. And the FCLP members, many of whom are represented in this room, came together on 6 solutions that showed the most promise of mobilizing that funding in the relevant time frame. And you can see it includes innovative financial mechanisms, including forest carbon markets and the TFFF, directly targeted at stopping deforestation and forest conservation, mobilizing private investment, and aligning the fiscal policies that I was just mentioning, both related to perverse subsidies and sovereign debt management. And I think the point is that the only way we're going to manage these systemic risks that I just talked about to global food security and finance is to have a systemic approach to forest finance. And TFFF is an important component of this overall picture. So what I'm going to do now is summarize my main messages again, in case you forgot them, that halting and reversing deforestation, no regrets investment to climate stability, not only globally, but across scales, that the loss of the non-carbon services from forest compounds the climate risk that we're already facing to global food security and financial systems. But the good news is mobilizing that finance is feasible, and TFFF is part of the answer. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Glenn Bush to tell you about what we know about how to spend prospective TFFF revenues in ways that can be effective in actually preventing those costs that I've just outlined. Glenn, over to you.
Sorry, I'm not Glenn yet. Thank you. Did I tell you too much? Francis is a superstar. Thank you, Francis. I'm not going to let Glenn away without a little introduction as well. Glenn, who is currently the Chief Environment Economist at the Woodwell Climate Institute, is going to give us a slightly different angle on this. Glenn's work addresses policy, social, and microeconomic factors that influence resource use decisions, with a particular focus on households, but also agricultural communities and enterprises in forest landscape, and who spend a lot of time in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and you've spent a lot of time in the rainforest, so it comes also from a connection of the heart as well as the mind. So without further ado, Glenn, over to you.
Hi. Well, yeah. I've been working on sort of forest conservation and natural resource management in the tropics for about 30 years. And I started out my career really working more in biodiversity and sort of national parks conservation before kind of getting more interested in the issues around communities and the challenges that they face in the face of trying to deliver conservation objectives. And so really sort of the first half of my career was in the field, working with people in these types of forests, in communities around these forests, trying to understand why farmers and forest communities were deforesting, and using that information to help with designing policy and practice at local around sort of program design to try and do things better. And over time, that sort of scaled. So I left the sorts of forests and got worked more in sort of training, capacity building with local government, before eventually finding myself, away into Woodwell Climate and working on these things at a sort of more global scale. So I just wanted to share a few sort of lessons from sort of experiences I've had, an overview of where we are about what we know about what works for forest conservation, you know, in the context of trying to meet these global demands for food, fuel and fibre. So the good news is we've got lots of experience that shows active forest management and protection actually works. So I think, you know, although the TFFF is a novel financial mechanism, the practice of forest management and conservation has been going on for decades. And perhaps probably one of the best known sort of approaches to this is the establishment of protected areas, national parks, forest reserves. And most tropical forest nations already have a well-established backbone of these types of protected areas going on. They've been managing national parks for many years. So, you know, Brazil has an incredible sort of protected area network. The Democratic Republic of Congo too. In fact, the first national park in Africa was established in the DRC in the early 1920s to protect gorillas around the Virunga volcanoes. The narrative about this over recent decades has sort of pivoted from not just nature conservation for nature conservation's sake, but has really started to address some of the fundamental issues around property rights. And you know, in these sorts of early models of conservation, often people were displaced from their traditional lands and their customary practices to make way for these national parks, which created conflict further down the line. And so over the last sort of 30, 40 years, we've been focusing a lot more on efforts around community conservation, how to empower local communities and indigenous people to exert their rights over these resources. And you know, there's been increasing sort of work on, you know, how to mobilize local communities and indigenous people to establish more formal kind of protections and get more formal rights over their land. So, I mean, you know, the context for all of this forest change, really, you know, what's driving it? And that is the sort of insatiable desire we have in the world for food, fuel and fibre. And in the majority of cases, farmers are doing what just makes economic sense. You know, as populations grow, they're clearing land, they're establishing new farms, and doing their best they can with the resources they've got at that level. And you know, the increasing challenge then is, you know, how do we govern that and get the right balance between maintaining the forests and also maintaining productive agricultural systems. And you know, in tropical forest nations, there are a variety of different actors, from, you know, large-scale, highly technological agriculture, the sorts of things you see in Brazil, broadacre agriculture for soy and maize, and you know, large ranching outfits for livestock production, right through to subsistence use, small family farms, farming at the forest frontier, eking out a living. And you know, so these kind of contexts are shown in the pictures here. So sort of the bottom left, that's broadacre agriculture in Brazil. In the DRC, by and large, most of the agricultural development and forest clearance is being driven by smallholder slash and burn agriculture. And so this is people mainly operating under sort of subsistence economic conditions, where they're consuming about 80% of what they produce in the home, not even selling it. And that's an example of a, you know, slash and burn agriculture in the field in the DRC on the bottom right. So as I said, these different actors in the landscape, they've got different opportunities and different decision-making frameworks. And what we have to do is figure out how to meet them where they are, to provide incentives for them to get involved in forest conservation. So how do we address their opportunity costs? Opportunity costs are often talked about in the framework of the TFFF. And what I also try to do is sort of try and dispel a sort of few myths and confusions about what opportunity cost means and how it can be applied, you know, in the context of one, benefit sharing, from the fund to nation states, and to how nation states should think about this in terms of designing programs. So to scale forest management incentives at the local level. So one of the economic frameworks we like to use is to sort of understand how these values accrue to different actors. So at the local level, subsistence agriculture is driving a lot of deforestation at the forest frontier. So up on the top left, you've got some newly cleared fields in the DRC. And you can see that doesn't look like a very productive form of agriculture. It works for that, in that local context, but there are many, many sort of opportunities to do agriculture better, to invest in new technologies and new production techniques, to help improve agricultural productivity, to reduce the intensity, or to improve the intensity of agriculture and reduce the pressures for extensifying fields and farms. And, you know, there are various economic techniques we can use to apply to estimate, you know, what the values are to local households, how to scale that up, so we can get a big picture sort of aggregate value on the value of forest farming, or the potential costs to economic growth and economic development from halting deforestation. So scaling this up then, to look at some of the global values, I mean, I think my work here has been is made much easier by some of the discussion we've already had. You know, the role that these productive systems play in the global food supply system is absolutely critical. And you know, in the top there, we've got an example of very modern agriculture in Brazil, and much of this production of soy is going into global export markets. And here's an image of a port on the Amazon River. Brazil currently produces about 7% of global soy. And so, you know, the impacts of forest loss on productivity in the national system doesn't just have implications for Brazil's GDP. It has implications for the cost of commodities on global markets. Coming back down to sort of national and regional values, you know, the role that these forests play in stabilizing the hydrological system, stabilizing water flow, contributing to rainfall are absolutely critical. Because you can, and essentially they are pumps for water which often go into hydropower systems. Here's a picture of the Inga Dam on the bottom right here, on the Congo River. And you can imagine, you know, with changing forest cover, how that might affect seasonal flows of water into the hydropower system. So essentially, increases levels of siltation, increasing, you know, or decreasing dry season flows are all going to affect the productivity of electricity, which has, you know, cascading effects into the functioning of the entire economic system at the national level. So the important thing here is that we need to start understanding the role of forests as critical economic infrastructure to support all economic activity at these different levels. And we can do that by putting a value on, you know, what forests contribute to at the local, global, and national levels, and sort of understand the trade-offs in the decisions we make. These days, with advances in satellite remote sensing technology, we can spatialize that information, and we can start to understand exactly where in the landscape the hotspots are for trouble, for deforestation risks, and how to respond to them, and how the choices that we make in responding to them can actually build more or value and increase resiliency. So, what we've been working on at Woodwell is just that, spatializing these values, trying to understand where they occur. So, and here we then start looking at very sort of national country contexts to understand how these values originate in the forest landscape. So in this map of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the light green area shows the extent of the tropical forest biome. We developed a model where we basically identified forests that are most at risk over the next 25 years from the traditional drivers of deforestation, and started to map out what the contribution of those forests are to ecosystem service values at the national level and also at the local level, to try and understand, how these values occur in the landscape, and to set out, some economic evidence to help policymakers make decisions about what to do and where to do it and who to do it with. And essentially, the top line takeaway is any investment we can make in conserving the forests from where we are today is going to produce net benefits to society and the economy in the future. Even though we might be putting some of those forest lands off limits for exploitation for agriculture. And we see exactly the same sort of pattern in Brazil, and we'll see it repeated time after time in all of the tropical forest nations. And essentially, with the pattern of deforestation, it's really focused on these sorts of hotspots of human development, and expands from there. So the big question about sort of opportunity costs is this $4 a hectare value that the TFFF is proposing as a way of sharing benefits. Often I've heard it talked about as, well, $4 a hectare doesn't seem like an awful lot of money to affect change. It doesn't meet the local opportunity costs of conserving these forest areas. And I think this is where we make the sort of first technical economic mistake. The $4 a hectare really is a way of dividing up the revenues that come from the investment fund. And so this is about how we share the money at a global level between all of the tropical forest nations. Where opportunity costs really matter is how countries make decisions about where to spend that money. So you can imagine for a country like Brazil, the theoretical amounts they could receive each year from the fund is close to $1 billion. The cost of conserving all of Brazil's forests annually is way more than $1 billion. So the question is, how should we spend this money to get the best effect? With opportunity costs, they vary in the landscape. So not every farmer, not every actor in the landscape has the same opportunity cost, and not all the opportunity costs are going to be experienced today. So deforestation takes time. As rapid as it is, it will take decades before the entire sort of Brazilian Amazon forest is deforested. So we have got some time, not a lot, but what we have to do is figure out where are the hotspots of deforestation and target the funds to the areas of forest that are most at risk and will yield the biggest benefits in terms of climate resiliency and other broader social outcomes. And using this sort of spatial projection of these economic values, we can do just that. And so these are helpful tools that Woodwell and others are working on to try and provide critical scientific information to policymakers about how they plan and how they organise spending. So once we've decided who to target and what to do and where to do it, how are we going to mobilise all this funding? And I think for people sitting in London and New York and all the major financial centres of the world, the people that we're trying to currently encourage to capitalise the fund, it's probably difficult conceptually to really figure out how do you move from this global financial mechanism into sort of operations on the ground. And this issue also about the novelty of the Tropical Forest Forever Fund also sort of clouds this, the real experience we've had for decades now in developing policy frameworks to address sustainable development issues and also forest conservation. The most exciting thing for me, sort of more as a practitioner, is this is the first time I've come across a financial mechanism which promises finally to deliver the sort of funding we've never had in forest conservation, at least in the 30 years that I've been working in it. So it's incredibly exciting. So we've got a moment where we can really do something very transformative and very impactful. So, Brazil and the DRC, as the cases of tropical forest nations, they have got very well advanced national policy processes in place and have been thinking very critically about delivery systems. So our critical sort of next step is, how to align TFF finance with country plans, and how can we mobilise it to also help capitalise and catalyse some of the other kind of financial mechanisms that are also promising to bring in funding. So, for example, RED Plus. We've been working on RED Plus now for the best part of 20 years at an operational level in many tropical forest nations. And as a result of that, most forest nations have spent an awful lot of money investing in training and capacity building around forest monitoring, which really helps with performance management and proving, TFFF as a performance-based finance system, we have to prove that we've actually conserved this forest in order to be able to get our money every year. So those systems are in place to some greater or lesser extent. Some countries are also having problems capitalizing those MRV systems. They're incredibly expensive, they need a lot of investment in people, and you can imagine in countries the size of Brazil, the size of DRC, which is the same size as Western Europe, how many people need to be mobilized in the landscape to do these forest inventory systems. So even though we have a lot of assistance from satellite technology, we have to prove what's going on the ground to the satellites in order to be able to calibrate them. So we still need a lot of trained foresters out on the ground measuring trees. So that's extremely costly. And also those sorts of field-based campaigns have to be updated periodically, every 5 to 10 years. So, TFF finance can be critical in helping countries find the funds they need to mobilize these types of policy programs. At a sort of slightly higher level, thinking more about how to integrate forests into national development plans. Again, Brazil, last year, they launched the National Bioeconomy Plan and the National Net Zero Plan, which really is a whole-of-government approach to achieving that type of coordination. The DRC is also following this path, and we'll hear from the Minister later on in the panel about the new climate economy approach. So the other issue that keeps coming up is, the issue around governance and targeting activities for resilience. So essentially now, through science, through better policy coordination, we are developing a much more robust framework that is ready and getting prepared to receive and deploy TFF finance. So now it's a question of, let's get this thing off the ground.
Thank you so much, Glenn. We're now going to move on to the panel discussion part, but maybe while the chairs are being put up, I'll do a quick overview again, and I'd like to also bring in, at this opportunity while the chairs are being put up, if you don't mind, as a lot of you know, we have the TFFF, the Tropical Forest Forever Facility, which is the framework, and then we have the financial mechanism, which is the TFIF. Now, the TFFF will be sitting as a facility, will be hosted by the World Bank for the next few years, and we have a quick star intervention today, as we have Valerie Hickey here from the World Bank Group, who's the director of the environmental program. And Valerie, I was wondering whether you would quickly like to come up and say a few words, because I know that you have to rush up again. Oops. It's a huge honor that you've made it. Thank you so much. And maybe just a couple of words from the World Bank's perspective. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And the honor is all of mine. And I have to say, I was late getting here because I was listening to the UN Secretary General give a speech somewhere else in London. I don't know London well enough to know where it is, but it was far from here. And he talked about the fact that given that we're in London and it's Dickens' city, he talked about a tale of two crises, the climate crisis and the energy crisis. And he's absolutely right. These are very real crises. There are many more. These two crises in particular depend on forests for a solution. But what he didn't talk about was a third crisis, which is why TFFF is so important. And that's the financial crisis. We're living in a time where access to money, where the impact of that money and the affordability of that money, the cost of capital, means that across emerging markets and developing economies and poor communities everywhere across the globe, the men and women who are protecting our forests, which are integral to solving the energy crisis and the climate crisis, can't access the money they need to put food on their own table. And that's why we're so absolutely privileged to be a partner with the TFFF under the leadership of the government of Brazil and many other governments and partners around the table. Because what TFFF does is embrace this shift from an aid mentality to an investment mentality to try and solve this money crisis. This is about figuring out how do we move away from the boom and bust of grant financing that too many communities who live in forests suffer from. They'll get a nice grant project, it'll last nicely for 2 or 3 years, and then they're abandoned again and left behind to try and figure out how to sustain the results that that grant financing provided. This is about figuring out how to use public thank you very much, it's getting too hot outside for the electricity grid, even in London, to survive. So it's about figuring out how to use scarce public resources, of which there are scarcer, not just in terms of overseas development assistance, but domestic public budgets are getting more scarce, with more pressure on them because we're still dealing with the COVID hangover. The climate crisis is real and impacting, and government needs to spend money trying to deal with that. And there's the food and energy crisis that they're dealing with. So the TFFF is about figuring out how to find that Goldilocks blend of using scarce public grant financing, some domestic, some international, together with philanthropic funds as startup costs for the TFFF, and then tapping scarce ODA and domestic public resources in the forms not of grants, but of loans and guarantees to create the junior capital that then unlocks the power of capital markets and private capital mobilization to deliver that long-term financing that flattens the oscillation between boom and bust. So finally, the stewards of the forest we all talk about, who usually aren't in these rooms, and we talk on their behalf, get access to affordable capital over the long term, in return, because this is a payment for performance system, in return for real delivered results. So we are not paying them, the TFFF won't pay them as a handout, as a nice thing to do, but because they have delivered essential infrastructure, natural infrastructure, forests that will get the rest of us out of this climate crisis, out of this energy crisis, and shows exactly how you move from an aid to investment model using the power of local stewards, the men and women and the family farms who are there keeping trees on land, to the indigenous communities who are managing vast swaths of land, doing it on our behalf, and to the local governments and national governments who are providing, as Glenn was talking about, the national MRVs that need to be more affordable even as they get more accurate and more accessible. That's why we're so incredibly proud to be partners with the TFFF, and we're looking forward to it starting. Thank you, Xenia.
Thank you, Valerie. Right, okay, let's move on to the discussion. Joao, if I may ask you to come up and join me. Isabel, Estimate Minister, Arlette, and Manuela, can I ask you to sit in for Juanca until he gets here in case there are some questions, because you have been working on this. I'll sit in the middle. Right. Thank you very much. Before we dive in, I just quickly give you the facts, what happened since it was launched at COP30 in Belém. It was launched with obviously Brazil putting in $1 billion as the sort of ace on the table saying, right, we are in with this. Since then, we've raised nearly 6.8 billion US dollars thanks to the Brazilian government's engagement. We've got Norway with 3 billion, as we heard, Indonesia with 1 billion, France with half, and the Germans with 1 billion. We've also got some philanthropic participation through Minderoo has put in 10 billion. And just this morning, we've had a fantastic new announcement that the Nature Conservancy has also committed 5 million from their fund, which is a huge, yes, thank you. It's exciting new step. So it's been a busy time. There's been a lot going on. I will ask João de Rezende, who works for the Ministry of Finance from Brazil and is also the co-chair of the TFFF Interim Secretariat, to sort of tell us about a little bit the case. We've heard a lot about market failures to value of ecosystem services and standing forests, to the point of what Glenn was talking about, and Francis also. So can you unpack a little bit what this market failure is? What are we losing, and what does it cost us, and how does the TFFF begin to correct it a little bit? And I'll have some slides in the background also for those who are not familiar as to how it's meant to work.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Xenia, for inviting me and having me around. And it's a great pleasure to be here, see Francis again, Glenn, and all these people. Half of the room is people I've met in the past couple of years along this journey. It's great to be part of this initiative. But I'm not a environmentalist or a person that has the background that these guys have, 30 years investigating what the impact is and so on. I'm actually an economist that came from regulating a number of markets, including infrastructure. And to me, this looks a lot like more of an infrastructure than this beautiful natural green ecosystem that some of us tree huggers would love to hug. It's actually an infrastructure that's been built over thousands, if not millions of years, to provide a number of services to the global community, and that it's being depleted every year to a rate of around 0.5 percentage point every year. That's why we actually chose that number as a parameter to decide who gets and who doesn't get paid. And so think about it. Think of a power dam, or think of a large number of roads. Those are all infrastructures that get depreciated and depleted every year. And people reinvest to maintain those infrastructures, but they don't reinvest to maintain this particular infrastructure because, first of all, they don't see it as an infrastructure, but second of all, because there is a market failure, classic market failure, which is the benefits of this infrastructure are spread out all over the world, as we have just seen here with Glenn and Francis bringing all of these benefits up. But the cost is concentrated on a number of people who live on that area and who depend on the economy that forest generates, which actually generates a lot less value if you add up the whole thing. But to them who are there, and who own that infrastructure, that's what they can get out of it. So when you compare costs and benefits are much higher, but they are not owned by anyone specifically. So you need, that is the classic market failure. You need some kind of public policy intervention to solve that. It doesn't solve on itself. You're not going to expect markets to be able to price the benefit of, food security in London or in the UK because of deforestation happening in Brazil or in DRC. And so there are a number of services that are provided. Glenn and Francis and Andreas have mentioned them. But if you look at just one of them, just the climate effect of this deforestation, you can actually see a number there. Because if you consider that last year we took down about 4.3 million hectares of forests worldwide. That's close to 0.5 percentage point to the 1 billion coverage that we use as reference. If you consider the amount of carbon that's being released into the atmosphere because of that, this is just the climate effect. I'm not talking about forest providing water services to agriculture, to dams, to power dams, just the climate effect. And if you price that carbon at a very low price, which is the price that is used as reference for reforestation projects in Brazil or for REDD Plus initiatives also in the country, let's consider that $20 per ton of hectare. If you look at the emissions trading system in Europe, it's about €75, not $20. But that's considered, somehow the carbon here is more pricey than the carbon down there. But let's suppose that is a thing. That means that we are wasting $26 billion every year, just for the climate effect, $26 billion. Now, we know that TFFF is a very bold and initiative. It's trying to tackle the additional marginal cost of keeping deforestation as low as possible. Let's say it is capable and it's successful of delivering only half of what it's looking at. So let's say that we cut deforestation by half because of this initiative. That means $1 billion every month being saved. When you compare that to what the costs actually are and the investment that are being made, it's actually a very good rate of return on your investment to keep that infrastructure there, providing all the services. Now, this is not considering higher prices. This is not considering that last year was one of the lowest years in recent history in terms of deforestation because of all the efforts of the Brazilian government and so many others. Not considering that if you reach a certain point of no return, then the impacts are geometrically multiplied, not linearly. So that's the lower bound of your, if you think about it, what is the worst case scenario where investment has an impact? That's how much we're saving. So it seems to us a pretty obvious business case that but it needs to go through governments. And unfortunately we don't have, to some people fortunately, but unfortunately we don't have an international government that can deal with this. So we need to negotiate this among so many partners. And Norway has been a great partner on this since the very beginning. So I'll stop here. I could go on forever.
And you should go on forever. Thank you. No, and I think you're right. I think what is exciting about this is that it's this collaboration of countries coming together who really want to make this work. And it's, as you say, it's difficult, but at the same time, it's an opportunity. And I think that takes me to my next question to you, though, as well. Sorry, I'm going to have to hand it back to Isabel, because I just wanted to stay with you on the other part, as we've heard, is the TFIF, and we've just recently had very exciting developments with the announcement that the fund will be actually seated in Luxembourg, and the Luxembourg government has also decided to participate with 50 million. So I know, understanding that the financial model is not finalized yet, but maybe you want to talk us a little bit through what we can expect. And I think I've got just something behind. I don't know if people can see.
Yeah, so we have a two-pronged approach to developing the TFIF investment fund. One is raising capital, and the other one is doing all the paperwork and the technical work that needs to be there for us to actually incorporate and launch a legal entity that can work as this money-making machine, this engine that will generate the revenues that will be eventually distributed to the forest countries. And the Luxembourg development is one that actually tackles two of these of the prongs, because at the same time, the government of Luxembourg welcomed very much the idea of hosting the TFIF in its own jurisdiction, which is a very good jurisdiction in terms of, legally speaking, and of hosting this kind of impact funds. It's interesting how when we mention Luxembourg around, when we talk to different countries, they're all very familiar with the concept, and they're all, yes, this can work there, which is something that always reinforces that we're on the right direction. They've been great support, and I can only thank them for all of this. And it's not only about, we just mentioned the TNT announcement yesterday about the 5 million. It's not just about the money value itself or the size of the check, but the fact that, countries, institutions, CSOs are putting their money where their mouth is, and that has a great reputation. Of fact, it really helps the work that we're doing, because it shows more and more that it is feasible, it is possible. We have a long road ahead of us still, but we're very confident that we will reach that landmark that Norway has established last year. We're talking to a number of countries. This is going to get, we have COP31 approaching, and we think that within the right time, the others will come as well.
So thank you very much, João. Without further ado, if I may, to you, Minister, we have the Estimate Minister of the New Climate Economy of the DRC sitting with us. You will excuse us because we're going to do this duolingo, as it were. I will ask her the questions in English. Glenn is going to help us translate, as she's going to answer in French. Now, the DRC is one of the receiving tropical forest countries, as it were, and is getting ready to meet the eligibility criteria for the TFF that Glenn also mentioned before, how a country's getting ready. So what is working well in the DRC? Where are the gaps? And what is kind of regional and global coordination or systems are needed to guarantee that the forest payments are actually distributed efficiently and effectively? Glenn, I've got some. Sorry about that. We're going. Right. These are the eligibility criteria, not just for the others, for the audience to understand a bit. So, voilà. À vous. Oui.
Bonjour à tous. Je voulais d'abord m'excuser. I want to speak for French because maybe Glenn can make translate, please. Je voulais d'abord vous remercier tous de m'avoir invité, mais surtout de remercier les pays hôtes, mais sans oublier les organisateurs.
So I'd like to thank everybody for receiving me here, the host country and the participants and the organisers.
Je suis très honoré par rapport aux précédentes présentations des autres panélistes, dont je remercie également.
Thanks very much also to the other presenters.
À ce qui me concerne, il m'a été demandé de pouvoir définir les secteurs prioritaires pouvant bénéficier, qui doivent être bénéficiaires des TFF, mais également nous devons savoir comment est-ce que la RDC se prépare-t-elle à remplir les critères d'éligibilité au TFF.
So I've been invited here to answer some questions about, what's the state of play in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and on the major areas of action that will benefit us from the TFFF payments.
Avant de répondre à toutes ces questions, je voudrais, si vous le permettez, rappeler le contexte national, les défis dont fait face la RDC, mais également l'opportunité que nous offre les TFF à ce jour. Maybe slow speech. Yeah, okay. Avant de répondre à toutes ces questions, je voudrais vous rappeler, juste rappeler le contexte national, mais également les défis dont fait face la RDC, mais également les opportunités que nous offrent les TFF aujourd'hui.
So before I answer the questions, I'd like to give you a little bit of context about the major challenges and opportunities in the DRC.
And the opportunities offered by the TFF.
Sorry. Pour rappel, juste un petit rappel, la superficie forestière nationale de la République démocratique du Congo est de 155 millions d'hectares de forêts tropicales humides, avec un taux de déforestation de moins de 0,4%.
So the DRC has a national forest area of about 155 million hectares of tropical rainforest, and the annual deforestation rates are slightly less than 0.4% a year.
Malgré ses potentialités, mais également atouts au niveau climatique, la RDC fait face à d'innombrables défis, dont principalement l'insuffisance des finances climatiques, avec... je continue? It's okay?
Attends. Turning towards what some of the major challenges are for us in the area of forests and climate change.
Les plus grands défis, c'est l'insuffisance des changements climatiques, avec beaucoup de conséquences, à savoir la faible gouvernance du secteur, mais également le faible suivi du secteur forestier, mais nous enregistrons régulièrement la pauvreté par rapport aux communautés locales et aux peuples autochtones.
Okay, so the major challenges are a lack of sufficient climate finance, weak governance of the sector, poor monitoring of forest cover at the moment, and the challenges of extreme poverty among local communities and indigenous people.
Avec les mécanismes de financement des TFF qui a été présenté aujourd'hui, la RDC saisit cette opportunité pour pouvoir mobiliser les financements et en bénéficier.
So the big opportunity for DRC from the TFFF is to mobilize funds to address these challenges.
Selon les estimations, plus ou moins approximativement, le paiement entendu est de l'ordre de 100 à 400 millions de dollars par an.
With the potential share of TFFF revenues being between $100 to $400 million a year.
Afin de lutter contre la déforestation.
Aimed at initiatives around reducing deforestation.
Mais quels sont les actes prioritaires pouvant bénéficier du paiement des TFF?
So what are the priority areas for us about mobilizing TFFF funding?
Il est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, nous avons plusieurs secteurs prioritaires, mais de façon sectorielle, nous avons ciblé 4 secteurs.
Okay, so there are many competing demands in the sense of sustainable development in the country, but focusing on the environment sector, we've got 4 or 5 major priorities.
Les paiements pour services environnementaux, c'est PSE, parce que nous avons déjà fait l'expérience, ça fait 10 ans avec CAFI, dont ils sont dans la salle, et je voulais déjà remercier. Alors, nous avons fait un déploiement dans 3 provinces, Chopo, Équateur et Maïndombe. Ça va?
Okay, the first area is around payments for ecosystem services, or payments for environmental services, and we've had a 10-year program of developing this area with the Central African Forestry Initiative, and we have currently piloted the program in 3 provinces in the DRC, Chopo,
Maïndombe et Équateur.
and Equateur.
Okay. L'objectif avec les PSE, c'est pour la création des activités économiques, socio-économiques, afin de lutter contre la déforestation.
So the primary objective of the Payments for Ecosystem Services programs are the creation of socio-economic alternatives to combat deforestation.
Mais nous envisageons également des déploiements en grande échelle sur le plan national.
And the sort of larger objective is to scale this to all the provinces at the national scale.
Le deuxième secteur, c'est la conservation et la gestion durable des forêts, RED+.
So the second key area is focusing TFFF payments on conservation and sustainable management of forests, the National RED Plus program.
Comme vous le savez tous, nous avons, au niveau de la RDC, nous avons un grand projet de corridor Kivu-Kinshasa.
So one of the key initiatives is to develop a forest conservation corridor between the Kivus and Kinshasa, known as the Green Corridor.
C'est un aire protégé qui est plus ou moins 2 fois la Grande-Bretagne, plus l'Écosse. C'est plus ou moins comme la France.
So, this is a sort of specially targeted conservation area around about the same size of Great Britain or France. Was it France?
Great Britain plus Scotland,
Plus
or
l'Écosse, plus,
equal to France.
Oh, equal to France.
Plus ou moins comme la France, ok. Le troisième secteur, c'est l'énergie propre en milieu urbain et rural.
So the third sector is around clean energy in urban and rural areas.
Le quatrième secteur, c'est le développement des communautés locales des peuples autochtones.
The fourth area is focused on the development of local communities and indigenous people.
Là, nous mettons l'accent plus sur tout ce qui est logistique et infrastructure, donc la construction des écoles, des centres de santé, en vue de réduire la pression sur les forêts.
And here the effort is primarily focused on resolving sort of infrastructure issues, construction of schools and health centres, and mini-grids to try and reduce pressure on forests.
Et le cinquième secteur, c'est le programme de réforestation des paysages forestiers dégradés, avec comme objectif de pouvoir restaurer 8 millions d'hectares d'ici 2030.
And the fifth and final area is a restoration program on degraded forest landscapes. And here there's a national commitment to restore 8 million hectares of forest by 2030.
La question majeure est de savoir quel sera l'impact des TFF sur l'économie nationale.
So the big question is, what is the potential impact of these TFFF funds on the national economy?
En considérant le déploiement des PSE sur l'étendue des nationales, nous avons décelé 3 impacts. L'impact social, économique et environnemental.
So these are really conceived around 3 key impacts: social, economic and environmental.
Juste sur le plan social, l'impact des PSE pourra impacter 83 millions de personnes directes et indirectes, que ce soit les personnes individuelles ou collectives.
So we aim for the Payments for Ecosystem Services program to impact the livelihoods of 83 million people directly and indirectly.
Et sur le plan économique, nous pouvons avoir un accroissement économique de 500 millions de dollars par an.
And we estimate, from the economic perspective, we estimate that this could have an impact of contributing $550 million a year to economic growth.
Et sur le plan environnemental, nous allons enregistrer la séquestration de carbone, la déforestation qui va être évitée, mais également la restauration forestière.
And in the environmental, under the environmental objective, it's focusing on helping us sequester carbon and conserve the national forests.
Avec tout ce qu'on vient de présenter, comment est-ce que la RDC se prépare-t-elle dans les jours à venir?
So the next question is, how is the DRC preparing to deploy this funding?
Sur le plan stratégique, nous avons mis deux options, le plan institutionnel et opérationnel.
So there's two main areas. One is the national sort of institutional sort of legislative framework, and the second is operationally.
Sur le plan institutionnel, actuellement nous avons le portefeuille de la nouvelle économie du climat qui est en charge, qui consiste à rendre l'économie résiliente par rapport au changement climatique.
So institutionally, we're developing a new policy framework around the new climate economy to help improve its resilience to climate change.
Et sur le plan opérationnel, nous comptons mettre en place dans les jours à venir le comité national des TFF pour préparer les parties prenantes, donc les secteurs privés et publics, les communautés locales et peuples autochtones, afin de parler des TFF, faire un état des lieux, mais également parler des critères d'éligibilité.
Operationally, we are establishing a national TFFF committee to prepare stakeholders for engagement in the development process, constituting public and private sector, civil society, local communities and indigenous peoples leaders.
Nous allons également mettre l'accent sur le partage d'expériences sud-sud, nord-sud, mais également les transferts de compétences et technologies.
And initially this is focused on sharing south-south and north-south experiences and focusing on the transfer of skills and technologies.
En conclusion, les TFF nous offrent aujourd'hui l'opportunité de pouvoir sauvegarder nos forêts, mais également garantir notre avenir. Nous n'allons pas les dire que nous ne le savons pas. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes tous témoins. Nous voulons préserver nos forêts. J'ai dit et je vous remercie.
So the TFFF is a critical measure to help us advance our agenda on forest conservation and meet enormous sustainable development commitments.
A big round of applause for this amazing Duolingo performance. Thank you, both of you. So in conclusion, I think that was a really good rundown of how this money can then, when it comes to making the payments on the ground, have a real effect. So thank you so much. Merci à vous. I'm going to quickly jump over to Isabel. So I'll give Juanca, who has arrived. Thank you so much. Juan Carlos Rintiash, who is the Executive Secretary of the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities and a very well-recognized Quechua leader from Ecuador who has been putting a huge amount of effort into making sure that the indigenous peoples are also behind this key initiative. Juanca, I'll give you 5 minutes to sort of arrive, and I'll get questions to Isabel first, if that's okay.
That's okay.
Good. All right. Isabel, over to you then. As we heard, and again, thank you, huge round of thank you again to the whole Barclays team. Thank you for having us, thank you for hosting us. And thank you, Isabel, also for taking a leadership on what you've been doing and speaking to the institutional investors on this. So without sort of diving into details, and I've now got my notes mixed up, but you know the answers anyway. What excites you, and what are the reactions that you've been hearing from this sort of sector, as it were?
Well, first, thank you for the question and for the partnership. We are delighted to be supporting this amazing initiative. And indeed, you stole my thunder. I was going to thank the whole Barclays team indeed. Some of them have been involved in supporting the TFFF for actually more than the past year. So thank you for that. And clearly, both points of your questions, I think, are linked to one another, because part of what is exciting is the number of questions we've been receiving from investors, asset owners, and asset managers, right? So it is always, as a banker, exciting to have opportunities to engage with your clients and the broader financial opportunity, plus, in this case, the public side of this partnership as well. So I wanted to first start with the excitement around the innovative aspect of TFFF. It's a first. We've heard it a lot today, and of course, it's exciting to be part of a first. I would say that it's great because it faces one of the challenges that blended finance has been faced with so far, which is, to scale up. Traditionally, blended finance targets more private debt, and so this initiative tries something new in that it taps into public debt markets as a complementary instrument. So two things. First, this is very innovative, but luckily, it relies on existing building blocks, that financial markets participants are familiar with, and that's very helpful. Second, I insist on the complementarity with other existing blended finance initiatives, right? Eventually, we certainly hope this mechanism will also support on the ground the financing of projects to combat deforestation, right? So this innovative aspect, but leaning in on existing mechanism. I would also stress the excitement around that co-design spirit. This is, an example of that. Is that working? Yeah. If you look at the number of different stakeholders assembled in this room, and the dialogue that has been fostered over the past year or more between, again, the junior and the senior, the potential senior tranche in the TFFF. So I would say that co-design spirit for me tackles, right from the outset, one of the challenges with these solutions is you can't come to the market with all I's dotted and T's crossed, because you need to consult with your potential partners and investors beforehand. So that co-design spirit, and third and not least, very excited about the systemic approach. So we've heard it in the keynote speeches. This tackles, yes, deforestation, but beyond that, it tackles so many important challenges that we're facing today, and food security, the wider resilience of so many economic sectors. So I won't repeat what we heard, but really it's a privilege to be part of an initiative which enables us to raise awareness about the systemic impacts that forest preservation delivers. So then, second part of your question, what are the key questions that we've heard when we conducted this engagement? So just starting by saying that we broadly spoke with two main categories of teams. So the sustainability teams of asset owners and asset managers, and more of the fixed income portfolio managers. So maybe borrowing from your words, tree huggers and money huggers, I don't know. But as you could expect, the nature of the conversation was, different. So for the latter, more the fixed income portfolio managers, a lot of the questions were around liquidity, and tied to that, benchmark eligibility of the securities, the senior securities TFIF will issue. Of course, the pricing and so the yield of these bonds, and of course, it's the right risk return. So jury's still out on the exact rating that these securities will have. But the basic message was, if the price is right, we can find a home for these products. Other questions, around currencies of issuance, etc. I would say, of course, that the potential senior investors were really eager to learn around the progress of the junior tranche fundraising, which will be crucial to ensuring, the right level of risk for the senior tranche. And now, with the sustainability teams, the main discussions were, if I go first around the portfolio, the investment portfolio of the TFIF, so the high yield bonds, questions around the safeguards that are going to be implemented, at the right level to preserve a wide universe of investment, yet implement, the right rep risk measures. Second, questions around, of course, the transparency, so the impact reporting that investors can get from the same data that the countries will actually have to show before they get the payments. So the essential message there was, we understand this is at scale, so there won't be bespoke reporting for every stakeholder, but give us the transparency. And lastly, of course, questions around the whole governance of that mechanism to ensure, safety around the use of proceeds, which were actually very well described just earlier. And of course, around that governance, having an entity like the World Bank involved in that mechanism was a huge plus, and that's an understatement. So thank you again for the involvement.
Excellent. Yes. Juanca, we've heard a little bit about the fact that there will be 20% of the payments going to Indigenous people and local communities. You've put your name out on the line for this. You've fought very hard for this together with Diana from the World Bank. Tell us a little bit about also what you see as the opportunity, but also obviously there are challenges, and what worries you when it comes to that those payments.
Thank you. Very good morning to everyone. Thank you for the invitation. On behalf of the indigenous organizations, GATC, before to explain, let me to send my regards to the leaders, first to the panelists who are close to me, to all of you. Indigenous people and local communities, and now Afro-descendant groups, for many, many centuries, for many, many years, we need to connect and to who we are speaking to the other side. Because one of the topics here is that enable conditions. When you invite me to speak, I think so you know a lot about me, about us. Indigenous organizations or indigenous people, when we bring our demands or concerns to the international arena, is a reasons. So, in memory of that leaders, in memory to that governance, that's why I'm here. That's why the dreams of my elders, traditional knowledge, how we talk, how we manage, how we give our life, protecting the data recognize us. Biodiversity, ecosystems, beautiful, pristine forests. Yeah, we talk to these resources. We feel it. We are connected. That is something that's very difficult to translate and push over the other side. The data recognize us. We are managing 80% of biodiversity of forest, pristine areas, indigenous people from Aman, Indonesia, connected with Mekong area, local communities, indigenous people in Congo Basin, Repaliak, a PV, not just Amazon, because everybody think in Brazil is just Amazon. No, there's another beautiful ecosystems, Cerrado, Mata Atlántica, beautiful leaders and brothers. So all of them, on behalf of them, this is an opportunity. Amazon Basin, I am from the Amazon Basin. Sometimes I don't want to say that because it creates jealous to other regions. You are talking Amazon Basin, no, I am from the Amazon. my EDNs from the Amazon, from the tropics, and in this beautiful journey that we were invited, we received World Bank. We received my friends from the World Banks. I mean, my friends. No, I have agreement with World Bank. My friends. We respect the governments who opened the doors to talk to us. I think so. There are some governments from Brazil. I have to send my gratitude because it's not easy to have this opportunity to sit down with the president, with the minister. We were there. When 20 years ago, when I was more young and beautiful, not like all right now, I was with my sister Sonia Wajajara in the middle of the forest, dreaming, talking. I was hearing her and sharing with ideas. What is governance for us? What we have? What the challenge for us for the future? The 20% you put allocated. I mean, for me, maybe it was we're going to ask 80%, but 20. Let's start from there. I recognize, and Sonia, at that moment say, Juanca, this work we need to recognize and memory connect with knowledge and elders who are here in this forest. This is my voice here, and to mention that we contribute in a good faith. We have a lot of criticism. Let me tell you, from outside. Civil societies make their own narrative. They don't know. I don't know how they make narrative about us, why we are supporting this. I respect that, but no, I agree. Let us build this process. Let us build this journey with the governments, with the actors, with investments. But don't talk on behalf of my voice, on behalf of us, because I have my rights. I have my commitment here. That's why I am an actor. I contribute. How much tons of carbon we have? You want to talk about that? Okay. I have the maps. I have the numbers. Who manages? The government says it belongs to you. Yes. Okay. But I have my rights. I have my safeguards. I have everything, but in that context, I think it's very important to put one point here about this opportunity, the 20%. Let us decide to us and keep it that and save us that number or that percentage, and we can help. But don't use me. Don't lie to me. That it hurts. It's the trust momentum in this complexity time. And you know what I am talking about. We are there. The data is terrible. We are being killed minute by minute. I don't lie. How much percent for indigenous people was going from the millions in the territory? I have the number. I have the data. We have the data. But we're still there. We are contributing. We need to be civilized. And thanks for the invitation for the governments and the partners. And we have very clear how we want to build this process as an opportunity. But let me put in the enable conditions. If you don't understand, talk to me. Talk to us. Visit us. Like I am doing here, of course. Food is no different, like us and everything. We do effort. And speaking of the language, that's not my own language. My brothers also speak of the language. But be with us and transform this process as opportunity for the world, opportunity for the planet, and everything that we need to consider again and again is enable conditions. Second one, don't look at me as an indicator. See me like an actor. What that means, actor or stakeholder, right holder or stakeholder. And finally, I think so that we, in that process, that about the 20%, we did our exercise. Some friends and colleagues who are here, with my leaders in Brazil, with the minister, we were talking daily by daily, many millions of meetings with other leaders who are not invited to the table, who don't understand. So we were there with my brothers from a paving. I remember I was talking to other leaders from other regions, say they are not connected, but the governance, the institutionality, the process, give me the chance what I have to invest, how we need to invest. And I tell you how we can continue contributing. Recognize, title my territory, secure for their generations, and we are there, standing there, contributing. And this is part of the exercise, and this is part of the momentum. And we don't know the complexity, we don't know we are talking right now and tomorrow what's going to happen. But we know we were there. We see the transformation in the territory. We see in the transformation the leaders are changing, but we don't want to be forgotten. The knowledge and the voices and the contribution we are doing is challenged. It's very challenging, but we are good in an act of the good faith. Indigenous people, my leaders, they are trusting this momentum. But we also hearing other voices, other petitions. We don't know what's going to happen with other leaders who are being elected in the regions, how we are going to use it that. No, indigenous people, we are ignorant, we don't know nothing. The other side, they don't know how many indigenous people they lead in the country. The other side, they don't know how to read my nomenclature or my anachromics as indigenous people, my language, or the language. We need to transform. We are human beings. We are part of the nature. We are connected. We are one. So thank you for the opportunity, and I just want to keep going, but I, with respect to the time, I think so that honor us. I believe in this process myself as indigenous. I was putting the language and transforming the language that what means carbon markets 2010, many years ago in Amazon Basin, with this carbon boys. You remember that carbon boys, no? I was one of the indigenous carbon boys, anyway. So this is chance. We work in Red Plus jurisdiction, and we have the data information, and we are here to transfer, and thank you very much. Believe in us, talk to us, visit us, and we continue in this journey together. Thank you.
Thank you, Juanca. Thank you, Juanca. And I think, as I said at the beginning, there is a moral and an emotional commitment to the conservation of rainforests, which is on the shoulders of Juanca and his brothers and sisters. That's why it's important to hear this, and the same goes for countries such as the DRC, because they're the ones doing the work on the ground. So thank you both for being here. Thank you both for your contribution, your commitment. There will be, as you see, also in the structure, and this is very much on the basis of what Patrick and Manu did for the structure of the governance, there will be a seat at the table, as you said, Juanca, for the indigenous people in the governance sector, and that's why this is so important. I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to have a couple of positive announcements that we've still got in the room. Thanks to Robeco, and we've got Peter here today, we had a really great gathering in Rotterdam a few weeks ago with institutional investors to hear their voices, to hear their reaction. There was, together with Finance for Biodiversity, Anita, I don't know, raise your hand there. Anita's over there. She co-hosted the event. There has been a Rotterdam statement that has been launched. We've now already got the signature of 11 founding members. And this goes to Juanca's point, like, we all need to be leaning in on this. This is governments, this is institutional investors, this is banks, this is governments on the ground, indigenous people. It needs to be, we need to showcase that this is big and it's important. So this is why this letter actually matters. We've got 11 founding members who have signed this statement. We've got Cardano AM, Etica Funds, Hargraves Lansdowne Fund Manager, Impacts AM, Mercer Investment Europe, PIMCO, RBC Blu-ray AM, Robeco, Storebrand AM, Sustainable Investment Management, Schroders, and the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. So this is a really great start. It's meant to be launched at UNPRI or pushed in October. Peter, if you want it, we've got the QR code here. Some of these signatories are here in the room. socialize this. It's important that this gets sort of endorsed, because this will also help the work of Joao and Patrick engaging with other sovereigns. The other governments need to hear how much this matters, how much this will matter in the markets, and how much this will matter to the wider community. Peter, I don't know if you want to have 2 words quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Xenia. So I think it's indeed important that institutional investors in all of the different countries actually start that dialogue with their respective governments, because it is obviously 2 sides that need to support each other. We brought indeed a large group of institutional investors together. We had a great event, really going through indeed all of the different aspects, the technical side, also the sustainability side. There's 2 different conversations that Isabel mentioned. And the statement is really sort of a way for institutional investors to really signal that support from market participants. So I really hope that this is a great start with those 11 sort of founding signatories, but that we can really continue to further also recruit other institutional investors to basically lend their support, and hopefully that then also starts to sort of reverberate in the conversations in the different capitals where ultimately the sponsorship capital question is on the table now. So please all join, and if you have any questions, reach out to me or to Anita or to anybody who's involved. We're happy to help there.
Thank you. So I thought we would have time for questions and answers, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. But the team is around. If you have any questions, we will be here for another half an hour. We can turn this into a conversation. Thank you so much, everybody, for making a very long journey, especially you two coming from very far away. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you again to Barclays for hosting us. Joao, you also from Brazil. So have a great, cool day in London, a successful further London Climate Action Week, and make sure that TFFF is on everybody's agenda. Thank you very much.